Lead-off panel on a Wednesday night. Julia Ainsley, NBC News national security and justice reporter, whose byline we just referenced. Jill Wine-Banks is back with us, attorney, former assistant Watergate special counsel, and an MSNBC legal analyst. And Jeremy Bash, former chief of staff at the CIA and Pentagon, former counsel to House Intel. Jeremy, I'd like to begin with you. Talk about our alliance with Israel. Talk about its importance, how many shared secrets we have had over the years, and the danger if those shared secrets, including danger to humans on both sides, the danger if those shared secrets get out.
Well, Brian, America has almost no greater partner on the counterterrorism issues, on the counterproliferation issues in the Middle East than our democratic ally, Israel. We cooperate very intimately with them on signals intelligence collection, on human intelligence collection, on a range of missions that are very sensitive. We have a long history with them, and it's really predicated on trust. And the idea is that if they share their intelligence with us and our leadership, we won't share it with our adversaries, like the Russians, and possibly risk having it fall into the hands of the Iranians. And there were really two important details in this Vanity Fair article that you referenced earlier. First is that the Israeli operation, if the reporting is correct, was a very sensitive cross-border operation by Israeli commandos deep into the heart of ISIS-held territory, where they were conducting reconnaissance, and they collected a conversation about this ISIS bomb plot. And that's the information that Trump reportedly revealed to the Russians in the Oval Office in May. And the second, although it was further down in the piece, but is very interesting, is that career professionals at CIA warned Israeli Mossad officials before the inauguration, don't give your secrets to this president, to this administration, because he's under investigation for his close ties to Russia. He may spill those secrets to Russia, and it may fall into the hands of Iran.
And Jeremy, the article kind of speculates toward the end. He could have been trying to brag to the Russians. This could actually be a result of collusion and a freestanding relationship he had with them. But there's another unlisted reason, I suppose, should be listed among the possibles, and that is not knowing how the world works, thinking somehow he was speaking to the same team.
Yeah, it could be naivete, but it probably was negligence, and I think it overall shows a coziness with Russia, an eagerness to please that is very troubling.
Jill Wine-Banks, if you're a member of Mueller's team, this is just an article in Vanity Fair the night before Thanksgiving. What do you pull out of this? How do you read this?
I would say it's an indication of how much longer the investigation will have to continue, because it opens up some areas that I would want to pursue. I want to find out more details, talk to more witnesses, and one witness leads to another, and that leads to another. I think there's some reason to be fearful of what he did in terms of our relationship with the Israelis, but it also is with the rest of the world, because every other democracy is looking at the fact that he revealed these very secret and very important methods of the operation, and they will all be fearful of sharing intelligence with America because of that. So that's beyond perhaps Mueller's his jurisdiction, but I think even within it, we have to look at whether it was part of a collusion.
Julia, your superb reporting has given us another figure with a difficult-to-pronounce name, among other things. Can you describe his relationship to Flynn and just put it on the grid of overall importance, especially to Mr. Mueller?
So, Brian, I think the easiest comparison here is to look at how Rick Gates was to Paul Manafort. Bijan Kian is a similar person regarding Mike Flynn. Just like Rick Gates worked with Paul Manafort, Bijan Kian was part of Flynn Intel Group, was really kind of the front man. He was setting up a lot of these meetings. A lot of people who worked with Flynn Intel Group over 2016 said they didn't even meet Mike Flynn himself, but they met Bijan Kian. He was the one setting up meetings like the one with Dana Rohrabacher. And his connections have sort of permeated through a lot of Washington circles. We know that he is one of the founders of the Nowruz Commission. They have a very opulent Persian New Year ball every year. He's someone who a lot of people know, but he's also sort of seen as this formidable figure. He really pushes for what he wants, and the fact that he was part of a group that did not disclose the $530,000 that they got through lobbying on behalf of the Turkish government is definitely of interest to Mueller, and the fact that that FARA filing, which came after the fact, still didn't include this Rohrabacher meeting. These are things that Mueller has been asking witnesses about lately, and these are the same questions that the grand jury is going to start asking about in the weeks to come. So he's really important in that fact.
And Jill, quickly back to you. You see a signal in the fact that these names once considered fringe, Bijan Kian and Papadopoulos, not main players who would be listed 6 months ago as we kind of mapped out where we thought this story was going. You see a signal that this says something about the depth and breadth and length of this investigation.
It does. It says something about the timing of it, but it also says these are people you go to build the case against the higher-ups. These aren't the people that you're really targeting. Obviously, Flynn is a much more important character because he was in a position of great power and authority. And if you can use Kian to get more information about Flynn and Flynn's son, and even Flynn's son can be used to pressure Flynn to tell what he knows. So I think these are things, and there's been some indication that possibly witnesses like Jared Kushner were called in before all the documents, and minor witnesses were called in. And then you get information from the minor witnesses and from the documents that you want to re-question someone like Jared Kushner about, and you have to bring him back. So it's a tricky process as to what the timing is. And I think that's part of what's involved here.
Jeremy Bash, do you think we're in for a quiet Thanksgiving break? And here's why I ask. Mueller, though not a showy person, has some powerhouses on his staff, and he has shown he's not above a kind of Luca Brasi type move, especially where the Manafort pre-dawn raid was concerned. He certainly has the power and the means to do something like serve a warrant over the Thanksgiving break, which really would get the attention of a lot of people.
Yeah, he could possibly if there was a reason to do it, but I think Bob Mueller is more like the kind of prosecutor who does things when the circumstances merit it and not just to send a signal. So I suspect that if he and his team are taking a little bit of a breather over the Thanksgiving holiday, you will see this continue to intensify into December. I do think the Mike Flynn angle is potentially the next place that you'll hear news from Bob Mueller on.
And Jeremy, what did you make of the Wall Street Journal article that we talked about here last night about Jared Kushner's potential entanglements?
Well, again, this is a tricky one because Jared Kushner was charged with the responsibility of working with other foreign governments, other foreign officials. The question is really, did he do anything improper? There, I think, is a theory in the Bob Mueller investigation that the entire Trump campaign and organization had a for sale sign around its neck, and that everybody, whether it was Paul Manafort, Mike Flynn, and other players near the president, were willing to do almost anything if they could advance their own business interests.
Julia, same question.
So, again, I think that Bob Mueller right now is in a timeline where he's going back and he is interviewing a lot of these people. Just like Jill pointed out, we know that just because someone is interviewed by the grand jury doesn't mean that they're cleared. And the fact that there are grand jury interviews coming up in December means that he's probably unlikely to be serving a warrant on Michael Flynn at this point. As far as Jared Kushner goes, there has been a steady drumbeat. Just like that pointed out last night by the Wall Street Journal, Jared Kushner didn't disclose a lot of these foreign contacts, and this is now the subject. So it could be, like Jeremy said, that Flynn becomes the next piece that we look at, the next shoe to drop, but that Kushner may be soon to follow.
Jill, we had a former U.S. attorney on this broadcast this week who made 2 points that got our attention. Number one, in plain English, he feels Mueller is just getting started. And number two, I asked him in terms of an iceberg, what do you think, 5 to 10% of this we're able to see above the surface? He said that sounded about right. Do you have any reason to disagree with that?
No, I think we really don't know what Mueller knows, and that it is just the beginning, and that we have to take this one step at a time as the pieces of the puzzle are put together. But I think that Wall Street Journal article was really brilliant reporting and really is very good reading for all of your viewers, because it lays out obstruction It lays out collusion. It lays out the false testimony. It lays out not disclosing things. It lays out not revealing documents. It's a very, very insightful piece and brings it all together. And it also shows why it's going to take so long to get to the bottom of this.
And Jeremy, you get the last question, and it has to do with our loved ones on the move on a busy holiday weekend. We all want to believe they're moving in safety in a secured world. Is it your impression that intelligence agencies are continuing their good work and their close alliances, yet maybe not sharing it up the chain because of examples like this?
That's possible, Brian, but I've been talking to intelligence professionals, and I think they are pretty much nose down doing the difficult work of collecting, analyzing information about our adversaries' plans and intentions, and they are hard at work in some very austere corners of the globe at this hour, away from their loved ones on the holiday, working to protect us. So I think we should take some safety and solace in that. I will also say that our thoughts and prayers have to go out to the families of those Navy officials who were lost at sea in that plane crash off of the coast of Asia. And I've been on planes like that. It's a tough ride, and it's a situation where we have to really hand it to those Navy officials who had to conduct that harrowing rescue.
Yeah, we have a special segment on that in tonight's broadcast. Tough time for the 7th Fleet and the U.S. Navy. On the eve of the holiday, our great thanks to Julia Ainsley, Jill Wine-Banks, Jeremy Bash for joining us tonight. Appreciate your contributions. And still ahead on this Thanksgiving Eve for us, Roy Moore's Democratic opponent, Doug Jones, out with a tough new ad using the names and faces of the women who have become accusers against Moore. And up next, why there was some mix-up about exactly how the president spent his time on this Wednesday. That and more. And the 11th hour continues.
It's my prayer that on this Thanksgiving, we begin to heal our divisions and move forward as one country, strengthened by shared purpose and very, very common resolve.
President Trump's Thanksgiving message from 2016, he was, of course, president-elect when he issued that call for unity after a divisive political season. Well, fast forward a year, he's president now, and here is how he started the day on Twitter, marking this day the 54th anniversary of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And we quote, "It wasn't the White House, it wasn't the State Department, it wasn't Father LaVar's so-called people on the ground in China that got his son out of a long-term prison sentence. It was me. Too bad. LaVar is just a poor man's version of Don King, but without the hair. Just think, LaVar, you could have spent the next 5 to 10 years during Thanksgiving with your son in China, but no NBA contract to support you. But remember, LaVar, shoplifting is not a little thing. It's a really big deal, especially in China. Ungrateful fool." Speaking of sports, the president continued. The NFL is now thinking about a new idea, keeping teams in the locker room during the national anthem next season. That's almost as bad as kneeling. When will the highly paid commissioner finally get tough and smart? This issue is killing your league. And that is how Donald Trump started the day from his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. The reporter designated to cover him for the press pool sent out word that the deputy press secretary expected a low-key day. That apparently didn't sit well, and soon a correction was issued to the media. Quote, "While the White House communications staff expects the press pool to have a low-key day, the president will not have a low-key day and has a full schedule of meetings and phone calls." I'm joined by Shannon Pettypiece, White House reporter for Bloomberg, Kimberly Atkins, chief Washington reporter for the Boston Herald, and Michael Crowley, senior correspondent for Politico. Shannon Pettypiece, right after we were told he had anything but a low-key day, he went to his golf resort for a few hours there in West Palm.
Right. The press was then loaded into vans. The motorcade drove to Trump's golf course in Palm Beach. They dropped him off. The press then held for about 5 hours at the nearby library, returned to the golf course, and followed the motorcade back to the Mar-a-Lago resort. This is the pattern that happens, whether it's Bedminster, whether it was last year at Mar-a-Lago, where the White House refuses to acknowledge that the president is golfing when he spends 4 to 5 hours hours at a golf course. Sometimes we'll even see him in golf clothes, getting in and out of the van. Sometimes he shows up on Instagram, golfing with people, or club members post photos. And all the White House will say is he may have hit a few balls.
Kimberly Atkins, I am old enough to remember when presidents did things like lay a wreath at Arlington or offer remembrance, offer a statement on the anniversary of the assassination of our president. I'm old enough to remember proclamations about the day of Thanksgiving, what it's come to mean in American history. Today's Twitter storm, the first part of it was directed at a private citizen. The power, prestige, and words of the president directed at a private citizen. What was that about?
Yeah, it was about the president clearly being angered that this person did not thank him for doing what presidents and anyone in Washington, whether it is in the White House or the State Department, is expected to do when Americans have been arrested and they're being detained in a foreign country. You would think that the United States would do everything they could to secure their release. It seems that in President Trump's eyes is predicated on receiving praise and thanks for that move. And what you said is absolutely right. This is the anniversary of JFK's assassination, the president who said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you could do for your country. And in recent years, usually President Obama during the Thanksgiving week would go to help give food out to the homeless or to veterans. And I remember President George W. Bush would thank troops. He once even surprised them in Iraq on Thanksgiving Day. And we have the president instead tweeting his anger at a private citizen for not thanking him enough.
Michael Crowley, what's your own barometer on how far we are from normal?
You know, Brian, there are a lot of days in this presidency where I try to rewind and imagine, you know, reading these tweets or these headlines even 18 months ago, 2 years ago, and it would have just been incredibly surreal. And now it's sort of another day in the Trump presidency, and we marvel at it. But you know, Ryan Liz in the New Yorker wrote a great piece that was talking about the Russia investigation, but the metaphor was the frog being slowly boiled. And his point was that, you know, these revelations about Trump and Russia are trickling out, and individually we're sort of concerned and surprised by them. In the aggregate, it's not clear what effect they'll have because this stuff happens gradually. But if you could have had it all come out at once a couple of years ago, people would be completely shocked and scandalized. So to answer your question, we're so far from normal, but we've been so far from normal for so long that we risk becoming jaded to it. So I'm glad you asked the question. It's a good moment to reboot. And let me just say one more thing, which is, you know, the contrast here between the way we traditionally thought about the presidency, which was this grand platform, this world historical position, and presidents would not pick small fights. They were above the fray. And on a day like this, maybe a president would be talking about John F. Kennedy or the American character. And instead, Donald Trump is constantly getting into fights with individuals who are so many rungs below him on the kind of power or status ladder in this country. Is a completely bizarre inversion of the traditional norm of the presidency. So again, you know, we're sort of boiling the frog, and I think we shake our heads in some way and say it's another amazing day in Trump's America. But if you could have looked into the future 2 years ago, I mean, you just really would not have believed it could possibly be true.
Or Shannon, by that standard, even last Thanksgiving, the world was a different place.
Right, but even last Thanksgiving, I don't think people would have expected something like a tweet about basketball players getting caught in China being a case. I mean, I think last Thanksgiving, I saw another article today about, around the Thanksgiving table and how people felt last Thanksgiving and the thought of, you know, still hopeful or what could be, or maybe there'll be a pivot and he'll be more presidential. Remember the grand pivot. And yes, here we are this Thanksgiving. I don't think anyone could imagine that the president would be in a Twitter war with the father of a college basketball player. Yes.
And yet it's a presidential utterance. You guys who cover this administration every day have learned to kind of bake in, you know, there are apps on the web that print these tweets on White House letterhead. There have been attempts to publish them. This is what the president is saying. Contemporaneously, this is the daily batch of history we get.
And what I think is interesting is, so there's how reporters handle this. I think it's interesting also how the world international community handles this, even how people in this own administration take these. I mean, some of my colleagues have done reporting overseas where foreign leaders have sort of come to acknowledge that these tweets are sort of a show for a domestic audience, and that they're not a reflection of who the president is or where his priorities are. And even people in I've talked to some people in the White House too, who again feel that this is just sort of a show, a persona. It's not the Trump that they feel like they see and interact with every day. Sometimes they feel like they have difficulty reconciling the difference between the tweets and the person they work with every day. But near universal, everybody seems to say they wish he would stop tweeting. His support, from his supporters to people in the White House to some of his closest longtime friends.
Kimberly, I think the president's scheduled to come back to Washington Sunday night, which is, of course, light years and many dozens of tweets from now. But he comes back to Washington to what exactly?
Well, it's a tense time. I mean, between still trying to find an elusive legislative accomplishment in the form of this tax bill, to the ongoing probe by Robert Mueller, to the fact that sexual harassment has essentially taken over the U.S. Capitol as one allegation against a lawmaker comes after another, and that, of course, reminds everyone of the allegations that have been made against the president. So it will be a tense time. I have a feeling that the president's Twitter feed will be very full in the days and weeks ahead.
And Michael, I know you don't like making predictions, but what's the chance we come to the end of 2017 and when the president is called upon to list his accomplishments, has to reach way down into that bag to pull out the name Gorsuch all over again?
I think there's a pretty good chance, Brian, and it's not clear how he turns that around in 2018 either. And the Republicans are going to have a tough midterm election in 2018, the way things are going. I mean, it's entirely possible now that Trump is going to lose the Republican majority in at least one House of Congress, and may find himself back to the kind of gridlock that President Barack Obama faced for so long. So I guess my point is, Brian, get while the getting is relatively good should be the motto, but it's not working out that way for him, and it's not clear how much he will be able to get done before the voters express their opinions about how things are going, and that's not looking so promising for the GOP right now.
It's been a mean season of late, but we want to wish a happy Thanksgiving to three of our best friends on this broadcast: Shannon Pettypiece, Kimberly Atkins, and Michael Crowley. Thank you all for coming on with us tonight. Coming up, what will Republicans on the Hill do if Alabama sends them Roy Moore to take a seat in the U.S. Senate? The 11th hour, back after this.
Lee Korfman, Beverly Young Nelson, Debbie Wesson Gibson, Gloria Thacker Deason, Gina Richardson, Wendy Miller, Kelly Harrison Thorpe. And the list is growing. They were girls when Roy Moore immorally pursued them. Now they are women, witnesses to us all of his disturbing conduct. Will we make their abuser a U.S. Senator?
It's a powerful spot by any measure, and with that somber roll call of names, Democrat Doug Jones is launching another attack on his opponent in this Alabama Senate race. That ad is the second one like it in just 2 days' time. In all, 9 women have come forward with sexual misconduct claims against Republican Roy Moore. The allegations range from sexual abuse to inappropriate touching and unwanted advances. They date back decades. Some of the women were underage at the time. Moore, we should note, denies all the allegations and maintains they are politically motivated. He hasn't appeared in public since last Thursday, and his campaign tells NBC News he doesn't have any events scheduled until Monday. A new Politico Morning Consult poll out today shows even if Moore wins the Senate race, 57% of respondents think he should be expelled from Congress. Moore's campaign staff is now down to a bare minimum. His communications director resigned today. leaving just 6 people. And as one of our correspondents pointed out today on the air here, that means NBC News has more people on the ground covering the race in Alabama than are working for the Moore campaign. Joining us tonight to talk about all of it, Charlie Sykes, longtime conservative radio show host, author, and an MSNBC contributor. Importantly, the author of the book germane to this discussion, How the Right Lost Its Mind. And veteran journalist Jonathan Allen, co-author of the book Shattered on the Hillary Clinton campaign, and an NBC News national political reporter. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Charlie, do you think there is undecided vote in Alabama? Do you think these numbers are on the move? Do you think these numbers are soft and changeable?
I think they are soft. And look, you know, Donald Trump has a threefold strategy here. You know, number one, convince people that the women might be lying, which obviously will affect his case. Number two, he's arguing that, you know, he's going to play the card and watch how this plays out, that the Democrats are hypocrites. Why should we hold Roy Moore to a high standard? You know, if the Democrats don't hold Bill Clinton, Al Franken, John Conyers to a high standard. And number three, he's trying to make this a red-blue binary choice, that this is not about these allegations, it's about abortion, it's about the Supreme Court, it's about gun control, it's about immigration. These are actually, when you put them together, these are designed to get that Republican squishy base back in line for Roy Moore, and it just might work.
And Jonathan, to Charlie's point, is another way of putting it that Donald Trump is signaling to Republicans in Alabama, look, I know this guy isn't the best Senate candidate ever, but his vote is what's important. I'm giving you air cover and perhaps moral cover, if you need it, to cast a vote in this race for the home team.
That's exactly right, Brian. He's giving permission to Alabama Republicans to vote for Roy Moore. I was in Alabama last week talking to voters. I think that a lot of them are looking for that permission. I think you're absolutely right to ask the question of whether Roy Moore's support is soft or whether Doug Jones's support is soft. There are a lot of voters who are up for grabs right now. And if the race is about the substantive matters, if it's about where Alabama voters are on political issues and policy issues, that cuts to Roy Moore's benefit. If it is about sexual misconduct, that's going to benefit Doug Jones. And I think that's why you see Doug Jones talking about sexual misconduct, and you see Donald Trump and his allies, including Kellyanne Conway and others, talking about policy and this tax vote upcoming in the Senate.
And Charlie, back to your beloved Republican Party, about which you write so fervently and with such passion in your book. This decision puts the president out on the edge of the envelope. There's very little support for the position he's taken in this Senate race. Does it do further damage to what is left of your beloved Republican Party?
Well, as I've said, I think it's potentially catastrophic because, you know, if Roy Moore gets elected, and I think that's certainly possible, then all the Republican Party is going to own this, at least indirectly, and they're going to embrace all of this. And going into the 2018 elections, you know, think about the consequences of that, to have Roy Moore be at least partially the face of the Republican Party, and then it challenges the Republican Party. Are you going to take a stand, or are you going to roll over like you have for the last year? And, you know, was this just a big bluff? And I don't think it's going to be a pretty picture.
Jonathan, the way they have GarageBand on a laptop computer, maybe the next application will be political ad. If that existed, every Democrat in the country could make the Roy Moore ad applicable to all local and congressional races tonight on their laptop with no help whatsoever. What application will this have, do you think, in real terms, to 2018 when the entire House of Representatives comes up?
I think what's got to be very frightening to Washington Republicans is not only that this particular issue that Roy Moore is dealing with is going to spread to other races, but in Roy Moore's history, he's never sat down and been quiet. This is somebody who, if he comes to Washington, you can expect is going to be very vocal about his views, which are perhaps, you know, perhaps in the mainstream for conservative Republicans in Alabama, but certainly aren't in the mainstream for the rest of the country. And so you have a candidate that not only has this sexual misconduct allegations issue, but also could be a problem for Republican leaders in the Senate when he gets here if he does.
Also don't know if they have parking for that horse outside the Capitol, but I suppose we can deal with that at a later date. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the broadcast. Jonathan Allen, Charlie Sykes, really appreciate your time and conversation tonight. Coming up soon, one less building here in New York will bear the Trump name. That story and more when we come back. The Trump name is about to disappear from Trump Soho Hotel in Lower Manhattan. The New York Times reports the president's company has reached an agreement to end its involvement in the hotel by year's end. The New York hotel had struggled in recent months, suffering something of a post-election backlash. They've resorted to lowering rates to fill the rooms. After the main restaurant was shuttered, a lawyer for the business said, quote, "Obviously, since the election, business has gone down." Like many of its properties, the Trump Organization does not own the Trump Soho building. Sometimes they just license the name. In this case, they run daily operations. They collect a portion of the revenue. Since the president has removed himself from day-to-day operations at the company, the decision in this case reportedly fell to his sons, Don Jr. and Eric Trump. This is the second time since the inauguration a Trump hotel has removed the Trump name after a similar move in Toronto this past July. The name was also removed from a Trump apartment complex along the Hudson River here in New York. Also on the Trump business front, the Washington Post reports revenue from greens fees has fallen at Trump golf courses located in New York City and Los Angeles. They write of the president's so-called winter White House in Florida, quote, "Last summer, 19 charities canceled galas or other fundraisers they had planned for this winter at Mar-a-Lago, costing the Trump Organization hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost revenue. Despite these cancellations, the president has remained loyal to any property named Trump. As Donald Trump celebrates Thanksgiving, it will mark the 100th day he has spent at a Trump property and his 28th day at Mar-a-Lago since becoming president. 307 days in all of the Trump presidency thus far. Coming up, the U.S. Navy 7th Fleet tonight investigating yet another tragic accident and possible loss of life at sea. The latest on that story when we come right back. Terrible news on the eve of Thanksgiving as Navy search and rescue operations look for 3 missing individuals after a Navy transport aircraft crash in the Philippine Sea. The aircraft was on a routine flight. It was carrying 11 passengers in all and cargo to the deck of the aircraft carrier Ronald Reagan when it crashed into the water, reportedly about halfway between Okinawa and Guam. Notably, 8 people were rescued from the water and are in good condition. Now, the aircraft in question here is a Grumman C-2 Greyhound. While something indeed of a flying bus, they are among the safest and most dependable aircraft in all the U.S. military. These aircraft first flew in the early 1960s. They're sometimes known as a COD, an acronym for Carrier Onboard Delivery. The crash is still under investigation. A statement released by the Navy said they're focused on efforts to find the missing sailors, but the Japanese defense minister indicated engine malfunction might have played the role. That's an educated guess. This is yet another incident for the 7th Fleet, which operates in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. There have been 17 fatalities and at least 5 incidents this year alone, leading to the removal of 8 top naval officers and the appointment of a new 7th Fleet commander, Vice Admiral Philip Sawyer. With us here tonight, retired U.S. Army Colonel Jack Jacobs, a recipient of the Medal of Honor for his combat actions in Vietnam. He is also an MSNBC military analyst. And Jack, I know one of the things you teach at West Point is called tempo. During kinetic warfare, it's battle tempo. But when we're not firing back and forth, in this case, it's readiness tempo. And a lot being asked of a finite number of pieces of equipment and a finite number of people in the 7th Fleet.
You know, not too long ago, we were talking about a 600-ship Navy in an environment in which our threats were not nearly as fragmented, dispersed, and as difficult as they are today. Now we've got fewer than 300 ships. My guess is not nearly enough sailors to man them. We've got a United States Army that is about the smallest it's been in the last 75 years. It's extremely difficult to protect this very large country with lots of threats, worldwide responsibilities with the kinds of assets that we have now, and particularly in Asia, where China's a threat, North Korea's a threat. There are a lot of problems in the area, and we're trying to contain them all with a relatively small fleet and a small Navy.
We should probably, even before we have any idea as to cause, put in a good word for this piece of equipment, this aircraft, because there's often a reaction in Washington and elsewhere to just, try to modernize and replace something when, in fact, this Grumman aircraft, along with things like the A-10, the B-52, these are old airframes, and yet they've never designed or built anything better for the task.
This aircraft, last time there was a crash of this aircraft was very nearly 40 years ago. You mentioned the B-52. The pilots who are currently flying the B-52, their grandfathers, literally, their grandfathers also flew the B-52. We have some very good pieces of equipment. We have some fantastic people. Not enough of either, in my view, to protect this country.
Jack, does anyone worry about how this looks, the piling up of these incidents at sea and in the air? Obviously, no one sets out to make a fatal mistake. No one sets out to allow one of our vessels in the dark of night to collide with a merchant vessel, even though the electronics on any one of our ships is more than was in the entire U.S. Navy in 1940.
I think everybody's concerned about how it looks, but more significantly, I think everybody's also concerned about protecting our people in uniform with the best equipment they can have, but also the best training they could have. In difficult times when we have expenditures that are not sufficient to take care of the equipment or the people who are on active duty, a lot of things need to be cut back, including training hours, aircraft repair parts, and so on. I'm not suggesting that this is the problem here, but it's something we need to look at very, very closely. The Defense Department has suggested something like a 10% increase in the defense budget, but that's to recoup a great drop in real terms in the defense budget over the last few years, especially since 1989, actually, when the Soviet Union went out of business. There was a surge in the Middle East after 9/11, but in real terms, defense expenditures have been dropping, and of course the population of people in uniform to man all this equipment has been dropping too. At some juncture, something's got to give.
Jack, a lot of civilians probably don't realize that whether you're part of a platoon in the mountains in Afghanistan or in the desert in Iraq or in the Horn of Africa, the U.S. military endeavors to get you a hot meal, especially on Thanksgiving. It's a big deal, and a lot of people try very hard. I've never asked you, despite having known you for years, if any one of the Thanksgivings that you spent as part of the U.S. Army stands out in your mind.
No, never. All the time I was overseas and in combat, I was never close enough to any place that had a hot meal to have a hot meal, let alone a Thanksgiving dinner. But lots of American soldiers, sailors, and airmen and Marines did have a chance to do that, and the military does strive to bring a little bit of home out to the troops in the field all the time.